welcome. Today we're talking about value creation and transfer pricing. Why is it important? Some are the best practices and tips to consider when addressing value creation and how that influences the transfer pricing policy. Today we have AJ Goswami and myself, Dean Morris. We're both transfer pricing experts with several years of experience. AJ and I are working together in a collaborative with Fairware AI on developing best practices using technology for transfer pricing. AJ, would you like to talk a bit about yourself before we start into the topic today?
Thank you, Dean. So I'm AJ Goswami, and I'm a transfer pricing professional for over 20 years. I've practiced extensively in assisting clients across transfer pricing compliance, controversy, as well as planning through multiple situations, ranging from startups to M&A situations, and also in terms of interest rate determinations for clients engaged in intercompany loan pricing transactions, and assisting clients right now through a consulting venture with assisting with Dean as well as other folks. We're working through with different clients and their needs, and very happy to be talking about the value chain framework today along with Dean in this discussion.
Thank you. And again, I'm Dean Morris. I've been in transfer pricing for several years, and I focus on transfer pricing for multinationals of all shapes and sizes, but I do a lot of work with small and mid-market companies developing practical solutions that for transfer pricing. So today we're talking about value, and one of the famous quotes from Oscar Wilde is that nowadays people know the price of everything and the value of nothing. It's a quote that economists tend to repeat, or often when they talk about value, it's often a very difficult term to define, and economists to have a common definition of value, because it's often used to make comparisons or looking at different scenarios. But we all tend to agree that economists know the value of nothing. So we start with a base case. We kind of know what that is, and from there we tend to debate on really what is value. But for transfer pricing, I think its value creation is much more defined. It's really looking at the activities of a multinational and where is the value being created. And AJ, why would you say this is an important thing for transfer pricing, value creation?
Dean, it's a very important element of transfer pricing solely because it leads to the right functional characterization of the entities that are transacting as related parties. If the functional characterization is off, it is an opening door for a controversy situation. So it is important to get the value chain right, and that gets you to the right functional characterization of the transacting entities in a small nutshell.
Yep. Next, I want to talk a bit about 5 economically relevant characteristics. And this is particularly relevant. Canada is the most recent jurisdiction that has modernized their transfer pricing rules. And modernize, it's what I really mean is that Canada's kind of followed other jurisdictions that have incorporated the OECD recent consensus on value creation. And specifically, it's the paper that was released back in October 2015 by the OECD that identifies how to address value creation in the transfer pricing policies with respect to that base erosion profit shifting project. Going back to the 5 economic relevant characteristics, this has been included in the transfer pricing guidance well before 2015. I think it was even back in the 70s when it was first released, but it wasn't listed as 5 economically relevant characteristics. I think that occurred in 95, 96. So what it is, it really is, the first one is contractual terms. So when you put together the support of a transfer pricing policy or designing a transfer pricing policy, is really understanding what are the different parties' rights, obligations. Number 2 is the functional profile. So this is really the the heart of the value creation, who's performing the value creating activities, controls around key assets, who's assuming or mitigating the risks. Number 3 is the characteristics of this product, property, or services. So what is exactly being transferred across the border? How unique is it? Is there intellectual property embedded? Really understanding the characteristics of that service and product. Number 4 is the economic and market context. So knowing where the parties operate, what are the market conditions, what's the competition, the maturity stage of the company. Is the company in a high growth, or is it in a more of a cash cow type of phase? That's really relevant on the transfer pricing policies. And business strategies. What is the strategy? Is it more of a short, early company strategy where they're trying to gain market penetration, or is it a strategy to maximize profit of a older technology? So those 5 forces, I call them 5 forces before the Canadian legislation that refers to them as the economically relevant characteristics. This is now in Canada in the legislation as a requirement to include in the documentation. And value is all the way through these characteristics. There's a few paragraphs in the OECD that's very specific to value, particularly in the first couple of these 5 economically relevant characteristics when it talks about the contractual terms. So it's really understanding what are the circumstances behind it, what can result in a transfer of material value is one of the paragraphs it mentions value. Also in the functional analysis is really understanding where there's really 2 key aspects that in here is what is the functions being provided to create the value, but also what risks are present that create value. If a certain entity is taking a risk, say for instance you're investing into the brand, they're taking a risk of certain campaigns or investments that would add value. If it's not successful, it might decrease value, but which entity has that risk? And then business strategies, where a company is often undertaking a market development activity at its own risk, enhances the value of the product through the trademark or trade name. Is that reflected in the functions for the purpose of established, what is the comparability as well as the appropriate compensation? Before we dive into some of the models of the frameworks you can think of through of value creation, there's another emphasis in Canada in the legislation on understanding the industry practices, and that's kind of an increased focus than what's happened before, and it's really tied into these 5 characteristics. Because if you're going through these 5 economically relevant characteristics, you do involved a better or more in-depth understanding of the industry, which helps understanding if there's certain practices or certain arrangements that you may have otherwise missed without going through these 5 characteristics that you may be able to use to add more support to your transfer pricing policies. If there's new data, to really add more support to the terms and conditions of your cross-border related party transactions. AJ, would you like to take us over and kind of go through what are some of 3 frameworks that are commonly used for determining value for a company?
Yeah, definitely, Dean. I will be happy to do that. But I also wanted to also add to your comment around the industry analysis that is very critical in transfer pricing analysis. It's also something that has to hang together in terms of the documentation of certain facts. So if the industry is in absolutely the best days and the business is not making good profits, there will be a disconnect that could be subject to potential controversy and challenge. So the industry and the client performance or the tested party performance has to be aligned and in sync. And if there are differentiators, those have to be brought up clearly. That is important in this context. I just wanted to share a couple of thoughts on that as well in supporting what you just mentioned. In In terms of the frameworks, so the OECD has provided detailed guidance and in terms of three distinct frameworks, or we call them the value chain models as well. And we will talk about them briefly today. The first one is the classic value chain model. It basically is a series of functions that are aligned in a linear fashion, and they are performed sequentially. And before I even get to the functions, I would highlight that this is applicable to the conventional, wholesale distribution or vertically integrated manufacturing businesses, where you start with inbound logistics, and you're picking, packing, sorting inputs to get them to the certain point of production. Then the operations functions would kick in to convert those inputs into outputs that would be then assigned to the outbound logistics area, where or the function itself, where the activity is focused on getting the products logistically across to the right customers where they're supposed to go. And then they're supported by the marketing and the sales and service and after sales service functions. Now, these are functions that are in the classic uh, Porter model of strategy from 1985. These are sequential. They don't happen in parallel, as I said, and then they're supported by four supporting functions related to infrastructure, human resource management, technology development, and procurement. So these come together in supporting the five core functions and activities. This model is, as I said, is focused on tangible products primarily, and has been historically, very successful. But obviously, things have changed, and the global economy has evolved into greater technology leaps and digitalization, and so that has led to a couple of additional frameworks that we should consider. But before I go to the other two frameworks, I would mention that this framework actually would be examples like Coca-Cola, GE, BMW, IKEA. These are mentioned by OECD in their guidance as classic examples where this model would be applicable. So it's in the OECD references. Then we go to the second model, which is called the value network. Now we are moving towards services because, as I said, the first framework was not very well aligned towards the services business. The value network model essentially focuses on three different core functions related to network promotion and contract management, service provisioning, and infrastructure operations. And the difference with the first model here is that these are actually not sequential, but in parallel. These are the activities and functions that happen in parallel, supported by the same four supporting functions of infrastructure, HR management, technology development, and procurement. And all in all, the goal for this, or the core for this model, is it's for intermediaries that are assisting bilateral interaction between customers and suppliers. So if you can think of, the global economy in a digital context, we are talking about the LinkedIn's and the Facebooks and Google, hotels.com, Yahoo, and then kayak.com. We can talk of email providers such as Gmail and Yahoo, and also e-commerce engines such as eBay, and also payment providers such as PayPal. They all fall into this area and have been quoted specifically by the OECD as examples where this model is applicable. And then we move.
And this one, I find it very interesting when I can contrast the value network to the the traditional Porter value. That in the first one, a company becomes more valuable as it learns, gains more experience, develops efficiencies, it scales production. Whereas the value network, it gains value as their customer base grows, because the interaction amongst their customer base adds value to the company, like your typical social media, the Facebook, your Airbnb, where increased interaction amongst your customers is such a key value driver. And as far as best practices, when you're documenting and supporting your your value creation. That's why it's so vital that you follow the proper framework, because if you're on the incorrect framework, you're missing out on really the core of what the value is being added. Sorry.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. That's a very good point to bring up at this point. And the third framework that I wanted to run across the audience was around the value shop model. So this again is a model that is relevant in the digital economy that we have, but it's slightly different from the value network. And the value shop essentially is focused on businesses that are involved in problem solving, where technology is a differentiator, just like the value network. But in this case, the technology is focused on resolving a customer-centric issue or a problem. And unlike value networks, where those are subscription based for profits and value that is generated by the business, the value shop is driven by fees that are charged exclusively for the services rendered to resolve the customer issue. It can vary from anything from medical technology that is used to diagnose and treat a certain medical condition to anything as advanced as cloud computing service providers such as Amazon Web Services, or even vertically integrated professional services firms that provide very specialized advice, for example, related to IoT consulting, as examples related by the OECD are, Siemens and GE, where you are assisting companies to deal with the Internet of Things and how to leverage those technologies to come to the next solution in terms of uh, their offerings to customers. So again, these are very distinct, separate models, and we have to get it right from the very beginning in terms of the right model. And the right model will lead us to the right functional characterization of the transacting related parties. That becomes the basis for the entire transfer pricing superstructure in terms of whether we are planning or whether we are trying to resolve a controversy or a dispute with the tax authorities, or if we are providing compliance documentation that aligns with the functional facts and the business narrative that is in place, along with the industry analysis. So all of this has to hang together, and the value chain analysis is very critical in this context. So, Dean, I'll pass it back to you for additional thoughts.
Yeah, and I like to think of Fairware AI as the value shop model, because that's kind of where we would fit in. Where in the whole, when we talk about DEMPI, when we're dealing with intangibles, that's another framework when we're documenting that. Who's developing, enhancing, maintaining, protecting, and exploiting that intangible. The value shop is really focused on enhancing. So you're always improving. You're always looking at the problem, learning from past experience, and enhancing as you go through. And like a lot of consulting companies would be in this value shop. So it's that enhancement is kind of one of the key drivers of the value being added. Another framework that's in the OECD guidelines that's tied to value, not necessarily much as activities, but it's on the risks and how do you identify the risks. There's a 6-step process, again, driven by this recent consensus, from the last decade from the OECD on value. And it really goes through, the 6 steps very at a high level. It's, what are the risks? Number 2 is reviewing the contracts of the risks. So it's really looking at which parties is assuming the risks. Step number 3 ties back into the function, the assets, and risks. So it's really looking at the actual conduct of the parties to how they are controlling the risks. And number 4 is contract versus conduct. So do the parties follow the contractual terms and practice? Does a contractual risk assumer actually control the risk? Do they have the financial capacity to bear it? Are kind of 2 key questions that are really looking at the risks. Step 5, you reallocate risk if there's a mismatch. And then step number 6 is the arm's length pricing around the risks. So if you have a higher risk, higher reward, which entity has that control, has the financial capacity, and have the people to mitigate it. So that's another framework that, again, is tied to the value. That 6th step wasn't incorporated into the Canadian legislation, but it is, again, part of the OECD guidance, is another framework identifying the value that's being driven. So just to conclude on this topic, even though Canada is described in other countries has been described as modernizing the transfer pricing, and Canada is the one that's the most recent. Before Canada, I think Slovakia was the last one that updated their transfer pricing legislation. Spain, United Kingdom, France, Germany, Netherlands, and Australia back in 2017. So it's all fairly recent. A lot of these countries have modernized, but I don't think it's really a modern. It's just really a higher focus on risk, on value activities, and where value is being added to make sure that the transfer pricing policies are strong, sound, and reflective of arm's length conditions. Any other best practices and tips, AJ, before we conclude on the topic here on the value and how we incorporate this in our as transfer pricing practitioners?
Yeah, so Dean, I would say in concluding, I would strongly recommend the clients and folks in our audience to consider, the value analysis network as part of transfer pricing analysis, even though conventionally folks would just say, let's do a functional analysis and come out with a characterization and move to the economic analysis. But without understanding the functions and the activities that generate value or generate profit, we would not get to the right point as to how do we split that profit, or how do we allocate that profit based on whichever method. That follows later. This is the core foundation and the building block for a very robust functional analysis, which will be hard for tax authorities to challenge if it is based on the actual functions and facts of the business, and obviously incorporating the industry and the industry analysis and the developments and the approach taken. So I would strongly recommend clients to consider this as part of the thinking, as well as planning and compliance and controversy propositions in transfer pricing.
Great. Thank you, everyone, for listening. You can contact us. Here you can see our contact information here, our email and phone number. Feel free to contact either AJ or myself to talk further, and we'd be happy to discuss transfer pricing. Thank you.
Thank you.